So, have you ever had one of your symptoms dismissed to the point that you found out later it actually was something serious? Well, if that is you, this is the conversation for you because for years my symptoms were dismissed until I found out that my invisible illness was actually quite visible. And that's why I want to talk to you today about the cost of dealing with an invisible illness and really what we can do to better support ourselves. So, I want to share with you three lessons that I wish I had known when I first got diagnosed, but that you knowing now can really support you on your health journey. So, thank you to everyone that's jumping on here live. Say hey if you're watching here live, if you're joining on the replay. So happy to have you here. My name is Tamisha Campbell, and I am the founder of EVWH Community, and I'm really passionate about supporting women with autoimmune disease and chronic illness. Identify the root causes of your symptoms so that you can build a healthy relationship not only with your body but also advocate better for yourself, especially in different healthcare settings. And for me, the moment my invisible condition became visible really did happen during a regular routine doctor's visit, which is sadly what many of us experience, right? We go to the doctor for something that we think is routine. Maybe we have some concerns about some symptoms. Maybe we're there because, this is our regular annual visit. We got to be there whether we want to or not. But it was during that visit where my doctor did notice something strange. He noticed some inflammation in the back of my eye. He thought it was odd. I definitely thought it was odd, but I also had been experiencing way before that blurred vision. I would have moments where I would literally get to work and then I would just go completely blind. And it would be terrifying and scary. But when you've been dismissed for so long, sometimes you start normalizing things that actually aren't normal. And for me, I just assumed, oh, it's just like a bad prescription, which in hindsight, years later, I think is a wild thing to think that like going blind is just a bad prescription. But hey, we're here now. But in reality, it wasn't a bad prescription. It was the fact that I had this inflammation in the back of my eye. And this inflammation was because I had an undiagnosed, which is now diagnosed, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's syndrome, and pericentral rhinitis pigmentosa. I know that's a mouthful, but what it comes down to is I have two autoimmune diseases and a chronic illness. And these specifically, not the rheumatoid arthritis, but the Sjogren's and the pericentral rhinitis pigmentosa impact my vision. So that's why I was having all these weird vision issues, but not realizing what was the cause of it. And we're not going to necessarily talk about my condition as much as I want to talk about my ophthalmologist and my rheumatologist and my optometrist and all of these physicians who essentially work together to be able to give me this diagnosis were imperative because they took what at the time literally was invisible and made it visible. They took sometimes what people will see as lots of dismissal. For me was many years of dismissal, many years of frustration, many years of like wondering there's got to be something wrong, but I just can't put my name or could put my finger on it. So if you've ever been there, let us know in the chat. If you've ever said, I know this isn't normal, I know this is wrong, I've gone to my doctors, I've asked ChatGPT, I've asked Gemini, I've asked, all these other people, all these professionals, and no one can give me an answer. Like those are the things that many of us not only keep us up at night, but straight up frustrate us during the day because these are experiences and these are symptoms that you are living with. This is not just something that's random that comes up ever so often. Sometimes this is something that you are dealing with every single day. If that is you, I want to share just kind of three lessons that I learned during my process of getting diagnosed in a process that I think if I had known earlier would have made my life a lot easier. So let's dive into what those are. The first big lesson is understanding just because you don't have a diagnosis doesn't mean that your symptoms aren't serious. And I want to say this first and foremost because sometimes we feel like we need to have a quote unquote answer, a diagnosis. Like you have rheumatoid arthritis, you have lupus, you have, whatever it may be. You might have fibromyalgia, like you looking and you're seeking a diagnosis based on whatever symptom you're having. And because you don't have that diagnosis, sometimes it can even so many ways encourage us not to take proactive steps, right? Not to say like, that's something I could do, but since I don't really have the official diagnosis, I'm just going to continue doing what I've been doing. But the problem with that for many of us, we know is like, if there's still a root cause, if there's something underlying there, we're not actually addressing it. It's not like the symptoms go away. They may be invisible to other people, but they're really felt by you on an everyday basis. So that's why I really wish that we understood that dismissal can leave us feeling that it's all in our head, but in reality, it's not in your head. Like what you're experiencing is real. And what I wish I really had done so much sooner in my journey is advocate more for myself. And I say this knowing how frustrating that can be for many of us who are like, but I do advocate. I do go to my doctor. I do ask for this referrals, and I still get the pushback. And the reality is, those things don't go away because sometimes we do, not sometimes, many of us live in a healthcare system where it's all about what evidence, what proof, how do they advocate to the insurance company when you don't have evidence that there's a problem to be searched out. And I get it. There's also frustrating because there's, some corruption when it comes to certain medical facilities. But all of that aside, your health is still your health. And I wish I had been a little bit more proactive earlier on in my journey to have those conversations and say, I know you don't think there's a problem here, but maybe I need to seek a different doctor in order to find the right person who's actually going to take my health concerns seriously. Because when we don't do that, the sad part is not only do we not get diagnosed, but then the situation can actually worsen. So this isn't a simple situation of, oh, we're just gonna like leave it, let well enough be alone and it's all gonna go away. It doesn't. So I just want you to remember, if you're going through this process today, is remembering that you know your body better than anyone else. And if you feel like something is wrong, if something is off, if something is different, I just want to encourage you to feel encouraged to say something to your providers, to say something to your physicians, your clinicians. And if they aren't listening, that's when you can seek out a second opinion, a third opinion, a fourth opinion if need be. So that's lesson number one. Just because you don't have a diagnosis doesn't mean that your symptoms aren't serious. Now, lesson number two is following the rules doesn't guarantee that you won't experience disease. And I say this too because there is a tendency in many communities, but specifically I notice it often in the Black community, is that there's this presumption that we are the cause of all of our symptoms. But the reality is there's way more factors, from genetics to environmental exposures to hereditary conditions, that can impact your health more than anything. We also know that research has shown your zip code has a greater impact on your health than any of your behaviors. So I just want you to feel encouraged that it's not you. It's not that you aren't dieting hard enough, you're not exercising hard enough, you're not eating clean enough. It's not these things that we're often told. The reality is that there's many factors that contribute to ill health. There's many factors that contribute to disease that have nothing to do with what you're personally doing. And what I wish I had been or understood more in the past was the impact of genetics. Knowing now in hereditary conditions, knowing now that my father also had rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's syndrome, I would have been more proactive in understanding, well, what's the likelihood that I can also get this condition, which I happen to get it, but my brother didn't. But I wish I had understood more about, genetics, hereditary, environmental conditions, and all these different factors that I just didn't necessarily take seriously. And even if you don't necessarily have a condition that's hereditary or genetic, you can still be impacted by socioeconomic conditions, right? You can also be impacted by access barriers, right? When you're not able to go to the doctor in the early times, when you have symptoms, but you're not able to go get them checked out, when you don't have access to clean water, when you don't have access to fresh foods, like all of these are factors that can make disease worse, right? So then when people say, oh, these are bad behaviors based on you, it's like, no, this is a condition that I already had. Now couple this with all these barriers that made my condition worse. Not I made my condition worse. Society, the system made the condition worse. So that's something that I think is very important for us to remember, is that you can technically do everything right and still get sick because of all of these factors and barriers that are beyond your control. It's not to sit there and say that we can't advocate more for ourselves and we can't go to our governments and our leaders, especially in our own communities when access is an issue, and say, hey, we need access to community gardens. We need access to fresh freaking water. Like, it's not that we can't do those things, but once again, we shouldn't ignore that those things don't exist or those barriers don't exist. And then the last thing I want to talk about is lesson three, is that struggling with your health doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. And I really want to say this because so often I will see people who will look in the past at some of our ancestors and say, well, our grandparents were so much healthier and all these different things, which is not necessarily true, but that's a rant for a different day. But sometimes people will perceive things to be that, or see someone who's in their 90s or 100 and they're just like walking every day and they're exercising and they're competing in daggone competitions. And you'll say, well, we should be healthier. We should do those things. While that can be true that there's certain things that we can do, understand that that doesn't necessarily mean that because you're struggling, you're not doing enough. It can mean that there are many conditions that we simply just don't have enough research or enough data, enough studies being done to understand what is actually the cause of that. And I can use myself as an example, as I have my rhinitis pigmentosa is a very rare condition. Well, my pericentral rhinitis pigmentosa is even rarer amongst the rhinitis pigmentosa. So therefore, there's not enough of us. There's not enough people who have been diagnosed, so therefore, they only know how much that they can know, right? There's people who are at the top of their field, who still come to me and say to me, "Sure, we still haven't found the gene that's causing this for you." So this is I go and I do my check-ins every 2 years with my doctors and my team, and they just stare at me and just ask me questions, and I give them answers, and they're like, "Okay, we still haven't found the gene yet," and I'm like, "See you in 2 years," right? But that can feel frustrating some people until you realize, like, hey, if the brightest minds in the world don't know the answer to this, why the heck should I know the answer to this, right? And I want you to feel encouraged to understand that too. Like, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to necessarily know how is this going to end up? What are all the steps I need to take? But it's something that we can understand is that each step we're taking is getting us closer, even if those steps take a long time, even though those steps could be frustrating. And what I really wish I had understood was how participatory the process is, meaning that I now feel a lot more encouraged from today that I did in the past to ask more questions to my doctors, to inquire more, to push back when I need to push back, and say, like, I don't think this is the medication that I should be taking right now. This isn't really helping me. Can I try this approach instead? These are things that I wouldn't have felt so comfortable doing in the beginning of my diagnosis that I feel more empowered to do now because I understand that I have done what needs to be done. And if those things aren't working, it's okay for me to sit there and say, let's try something different, because this is not a simple process of the doctor is telling you what to do and you just do it. And it's also not that your pushback should never be taken as you aren't, you're not being compliant. You are being compliant. You simply are saying, let's try something different. And you're being a participant in your own health journey, which is something that's very important. So I just want you to remember that we should never blame ourselves if something is wrong, if we're dealing with illness or disease. If people who are the brightest minds in the world haven't been able to figure things out, then it's okay that we haven't figured it out either. And we can be part of this process of figuring it out and part of this process of getting closer to a diagnosis or getting closer to a solution or getting close to remission or whatever it may be. We all have different journeys on the autoimmune pathway. For some of us, it truly is like full remission. For others of us, it's management and living with autoimmune disease. Whatever it may be for you is your journey. But I just want you to feel encouraged that you don't have to do this alone. And that if you are, struggling with symptoms or concerns or have different experiences, it's okay to really challenge those dismissive responses that you get. It's okay to seek that second, that third, that fourth opinion if need be. And it's also okay to trust yourself enough to investigate more when you know something is wrong, even if everyone else says it's quote unquote normal. So that's all I have for y'all today. I'd love to hear from you personally. You can either share it in the comments or send me a direct message. Was there ever a moment when you realized that your body wasn't the problem, that you weren't making it all up, that it wasn't all in your head, that there was something a lot deeper going on? I'd love to kind of hear your story as I've shared a little bit of mine. Or maybe if you've ever had a symptom that was dismissed that you knew was something they said it was, and it turned out to be something later. Would love to hear your story as well for that. And as always, we're the EBWH community. We share weekly here, whether that's, I say weekly, but we share pretty much more than weekly. But we do our lives here on Substack. We also do our newsletters. So if you're not yet subscribed to the EBWH community newsletter, subscribe. We'd love to have you part of our community as we continue to grow and we continue to, have more awareness of autoimmune disease, chronic illness, and really create a community where we can all support each other and understand that our autoimmune disease, our chronic illness isn't our fault. But that doesn't mean that we can't take proactive steps to be able to live well. So thank you so much for joining us live. Hope to see you next time. Have a great day. Bye for now.